defunding of what they call Obamacare, and also the rule on the nutrition bill, the SNAP bill. The Senate's doing energy efficiency, and on C-SPAN 3, Benghazi hearing. Thanks for being with us.
The House will be in order. The Chair lays before the House a communication from the Speaker.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., September 19, 2013. I hereby appoint the Honorable Jason T. Smith to act as Speaker pro tempore on this day. Signed, John A. Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Pursuant to the order of the House of January 3, 2013, the Chair will recognize members from lists submitted by the majority and minority leaders for morning hour debate. The Chair will alternate recognition between the parties, with each party limited to 1 hour, and each member other than the majority and minority leaders and the minority whip limited to 5 minutes each. But in no event shall debate continue beyond 11:50 a.m. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the House Republicans prepare to shut down the government and threaten the global economy with the debt ceiling blackmail, it's ironic that they refuse to allow their members to vote on their own spending bills. They even refuse to allow a conference committee with the Senate to resolve the budget impasse. I suppose it should be no surprise that their denial extends to climate change and the future of the planet. But Americans don't have that luxury. Between this summer's wildfires in the West, last year's drought, Superstorm Sandy, and the recent horrific flooding in Colorado, Americans are seeing the impact of climate change. Tuesday, Matt Russell, a fifth-generation Iowa farmer, gave a quick history of what climate change looks like in Iowa. In 2008, they suffered a 500-year flood. In 2010, there was another series of 100-year floods. The next year, the Missouri River wiped out thousands of acres of farmland, some of which will never be farmed again. And in 2012 was the catastrophic drought. In half a decade, Iowa saw the worst flooding and the worst drought in over a century of record-keeping. This is what climate change will look like, and it will get worse and more extreme, which is exactly what's happening this year. May 4th, a foot of heavy, wet snow, the most snow ever recorded in Iowa in May. Then it began raining, the most rain ever recorded in the month of May in Iowa. Then it was drought. Last month was the driest August on record, even drier than last year's epic drought. And in between, July was one of the coldest on record, with temperatures in the 30s. And now they're experiencing one of the hottest Septembers on record. The hottest days in 2013 came after Labor Day, multiple days of over 100-degree temperature. This is what climate change means, the wrong weather at the wrong time. Their joke is that February came in May, along with all the rain for the summer, and September came in July, and July came in September, and now they wonder what month is going to show up in October. But it's not a joke for the people who are trying to farm. It's not a joke for the taxpayers who are picking up the cost of crop insurance, which totaled almost $2 billion last year. Now, farmers in Iowa and elsewhere are working to be part of the solution, but you know, what they can't afford is for Congress to continue wasting time with debate, ignoring science, and spending billions of dollars on disaster relief. They want us to spend money up front, not just to save money in the long run, but the lives and indeed the environment for all our families to enjoy. Listening to America's farmers or just looking out of the window and paying close attention to the news tells Americans all they need to know. The science is real and the time for action is now. Farmers, small business, utilities, insurance companies, universities, college, we all should insist that Congress stop playing games with the budget, threatening the global economy with debt-ceiling blackmail and the future of the planet. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Murphy, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week, America was once again shocked by the tragic shootings at the Navy Yard in Washington, D.C. And once again, it raised the issues of how we are handling mental health to stop this terrible violence. When you look at the background that is reported in the general media about Aaron Alexis, who's responsible for shooting at the Navy Yard, we see a record of being arrested multiple times, receiving treatment at a veterans hospital. Law enforcement officials in Rhode Island were called upon because he had been hearing voices in his head. He had said that he had sent 3 people to follow, that he was worried he had sent 3 people to follow him, to keep him awake by talking to him and sending vibrations to his body. He checked into multiple hotels to avoid the voices. He was also had episodes of shooting firearms. More recently, there was also a case in Georgia where Michael Brandon Hill clutched a butcher knife over his parents' bed, attempted to set the home on fire, made deadly threats through social media, was bipolar, attention disorder, and schizophrenic, told police he was off medication, had stolen a firearm, had 498 rounds of ammunition. When he entered a school, luckily, no one was harmed. What America has done in dealing with people with mental illness is so far short of what we should be doing, it's not surprising we are still failing in the system. America has replaced its psychiatric hospitals with prisons and bridges for the homeless. Pennsylvania some years ago had 20 psychiatric hospitals and 8 jails. Now we have 20 jails and 8 psychiatric hospitals. 1 out of 5 men is a mental illness, and 1 out of every 2 women in those jails has a mental illness. When we use such things as consider background checks for those to obtain guns, in 2010, when 14 million attempts were made to purchase weapons, there were 72,000 denials because those folks had pinged positive because they had an arrest record or had an inpatient obligatory stay. Of those, 34,000 had a felony conviction indictments, 13,000 were fugitives, but there was only 44 prosecutions and only a few of those were found guilty. The background checks does not even begin to deal with the millions of people who have a psychiatric illness and go untreated. There is a lack of inpatient and outpatient treatment options, and we need to begin, finally, to deal with these problems. What we need are several aspects, and in the next couple weeks, I'll be offering a package of legislation that finally works towards dealing with these, so we do not continue to say our primary methods of treatment for Americans with mental illness are jails and the homeless. What I see we need to do is, first, we have a lack of inpatient treatment options. There was 500,000 psychiatric beds in 1955. Now there are less than 40,000. What we need to do is increase the options here available for people with inpatient and outpatient treatment. 2, we need to get serious on research for those with mental illness. NIMH has a paltry little over $1 billion in money it can spend on research, and very little of that is spent on those with serious mental illness. And indeed, most with mental illness are not violent. But when you see someone with a selective set of symptoms with serious mental illness, we know they may be at more increased risk, particularly those who have a history of delusions, paranoia, and interest in violence. But what happens in general, from the time of onset of first symptoms, a person may wait an average of 110 weeks before they get into treatment. In addition, we need more research on medications. 11.4 million Americans adults suffer from serious mental illness, including schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and major depression. But 2 million are not being treated. We need more effective research. 3, federal laws which are meant to protect confidentiality, such as HIPAA and FERPA, otherwise known as the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, have frustrated the efforts of physicians and family to share information. Many times doctors and other officials cannot get to the very people who can prevent problems and get the person in treatment. Schools, among colleges and high schools, do not share information with parents because they're afraid of getting sued. Mental health professionals hold on to information and they wish they could talk more with parents. We need to clarify these boundaries. 4, law enforcement officials need more training. Police officers are on the front line of dealing with the violently mentally ill. They need to understand how to identify and handle mental health emergencies. In addition, the primary responders to these ought to be paramedics, those who are trained to deal with health issues. To remove the stigma means to say from the very beginning we need to be dealing with this as a health issue. 1,000 homicides a year are committed by those with serious mental illness. It's only 5 to 10% of homicides, but we need to make sure we have that help. We also need to make sure we have integrated care at community mental health centers. Unfortunately, there's barriers to billing with Medicaid. We need incentives for pediatricians to get additional training. We need to review what SAMHSA does with its spending, and VA hospitals need to have more help. Overall, there's many areas that we can engage in, and we will continue to do this to make sure we effectively treat mental illness. Thank you.
Thank you. The chair recognizes a gentlewoman from Washington, Ms. DelBene, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to speak about the critical need for Congress to act now and support our struggling economy. Like many families and businesses across my district, I've been disappointed by Congress's inability to address our nation's fiscal challenges. We need to stop lurching from one manufactured crisis to the next, budgeting 90 days at a time, because it's actually the most expensive and inefficient way to budget. As a businesswoman and entrepreneur, I understand that you don't just manage a business for a few months at a time, but you plan for the long term. Businesses and families deserve a long-term budget that provides them with the visibility needed to plan for the future. Every day we fail to do this, Congress is harming the economy. We must take a balanced, long-term approach to the budget and end the irresponsible, across-the-board cuts that were triggered by sequestration. And we must act now to prevent a government shutdown. I remain committed to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to pass a budget that reduces the deficit and creates jobs. We must come together now to get this job done. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back her time. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Garrett, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, prominently featured on the White House website, President Obama issued the following memorandum to all heads of executive departments and agencies. He said, "My administration is committed to creating an unprecedented level of openness in government. We will work together to ensure the public's trust and establish a system of transparency, public participation, and collaboration. Openness will strengthen our democracy and promote efficiency and effectiveness in government."
Is this who's next?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, despite once serving as the White House Chief of Staff, Secretary of Treasury Jack Lew apparently never got that memo. You see, on June 7th, shortly after the news broke that the Internal Revenue Service engaged in the reprehensible practice of targeting conservative-leaning political groups, I sent a letter to Secretary Lew with a handful of questions relating to his time served as White House Chief of Staff. Specifically, I asked, first, when was the first time Secretary Lew, as Chief of Staff, became aware of the IRS targeting of tax-exempt groups, including rumors or media reports of targeting, independent of his knowledge of the IG's investigation? Second, given that the IRS Commissioner Douglas Shulman made numerous trips to the White House between October 2009 and December 2012, I asked Secretary Lew, again as Chief of Staff, did he attend any meetings with Shulman? Next, I asked if anything was discussed relating to the IRS investigation concerning conservative-leaning organizations and their tax-exempt status. Finally, I asked if Secretary Lew, as Chief of Staff, was involved in any or had any knowledge of rumors of conservative groups that were being targeted, or of media reports highlighting the IG investigation relating to the targeting, or any IRS personnel involved in potentially inappropriate targeting of conservative groups. Well, sir, my letters went unanswered for week after week after week. So I made numerous emails and phone calls to the Treasury Department requesting a reply to my letter. Finally, a letter came. But unfortunately, rather than simply answering my questions and putting to bed any appearance of impropriety, Lew chose to not answer any of my direct questions. So now, 3.5 months have now passed since I asked those very simple and direct questions. I still cannot get an answer from him. So I'm here today to encourage you to join me in the fight to get answers from Secretary Lew. See, the President's memo was very clear. His government is to be the most transparent in the history of this great nation. Well then, we have to bring Secretary Lew up to speed on that memo. Jack Lew served as Chief of Staff of the President while some of the most egregious, reprehensible behavior ever displayed by the IRS took place. The American people have the right to know what he knows about the IRS scandal and when he knew it, what involvement he had and as Chief of Staff with personnel at the IRS. It is essential to the functioning of a representative government that the citizens, the voters who are represented, have confidence in the integrity of the system. If they don't, the government won't be trusted. Government must earn that trust. That means that the men and women who manage the day-to-day affairs, such as he, must be trustworthy people. And to maintain that confidence, the public, the men and the women, must avoid even the appearance of impropriety. It is that principle that judges adhere to when they recuse themselves from cases where they have an interest that may appear to be an interest in the outcome. The public must be assured that the outcomes generated by the men and women in Washington are not influenced by the outcome of their decisions. Otherwise, the system, whether it's corrupt or not, will have the taint of corruption, and that's just as bad. The President was right to emphasize transparency, and it is essential to the proper functioning of a representative government. It's up to the citizens and their representatives to demand that transparency and the propriety and that it maintains. So again, I ask my colleagues and you, the American public, to join me in demanding the openness that President Obama promised. And to Secretary Lew, I'm still waiting for those answers. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Kildee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I rise this morning to strongly oppose the deep and extreme cuts to nutrition programs that once again are being brought to the floor by the Republican majority. H.R. 3102, which we call the More Hunger, Less Opportunity Act, takes a bad idea and makes it worse, cutting billions, literally billions of dollars in aid for the working poor, people who struggle every single day literally to put food on the table. This bill, it's heartless. It's gone from bad to worse. We've seen this movie before. In June, when the Republicans brought this $20 billion in cuts to the floor as a part of the Farm Bill, it derailed the Farm Bill, broke what had been a bipartisan effort for as long as anybody around here can remember. And now, $40 billion in cuts. Three-quarters of the households receiving SNAP include a child, a senior, somebody who is disabled. This legislation literally punishes those folks. Republican desire, for whatever reason, incomprehensible to many of us, to deprive even the neediest Americans with a basic necessity, food, it's, as I said, derailed the Farm Bill process and now has the chance to risk hurting more Americans. This bill would shamefully and literally take food out of the mouths of nearly 4 million children, seniors, and disabled. I urge my colleagues, Republicans and Democrats, to join me in opposing this legislation. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Fitzpatrick, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to relay disturbing but not surprising news about the President's health care law, news that is coming back from my district in Pennsylvania. Countless neighbors of mine employed by Sesame Place, which is a division of SeaWorld Entertainment, have been told that their hours will be cut back, presumably to comply with the crushing costs and regulations associated with the so-called Affordable Care Act. Adding insult to injury, they're being told that their health care is being terminated. Simply put, Mr. Speaker, President Obama made promises to the American people, and right now those promises are not being kept. People were told that if they liked their plan, that they could keep it. We were told that the health care law would not raise taxes, only to see that 20 taxes are being used to fund this law. These promises have been broken, and my neighbors are seeing it, and they're seeing it up close, and they're seeing it personal. This law is hurting real people in my district and around the country, and it must be repealed, and it must be replaced. I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Hoyer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is with great sadness that I rise to remember 3 of my constituents who tragically lost their lives in Monday's shooting along with 9 other innocent victims at the Washington Navy Yard. The entire Washington metropolitan area is still in shock at the horrific news. In Maryland's 5th District, home to many who serve or have previously served in military and civilian roles at the Navy Yard, communities are grieving the loss of Sylvia Frazier, Frank Kohler, and Kenneth Proctor. In addition, Michael Arnold, Kathy Gard, John Roger Johnson, Vishnu Pandit, Martin Bodrog, Arthur Daniels, Mary Frances Knight, Gerald Reed, and Richard Michael Ridgell lost their lives in this senseless attack. I, along with all my colleagues, offer my condolences on behalf of all who live in the 5th District and in our country. And I wish to take a moment to reflect from this floor on their lives of hard work and dedicated service. Sylvia Frazier had been an information assurance manager at the Naval Sea Systems Command since 2000. Because she loved interacting with people so much, Sylvia took a night job at the Walmart in Waldorf, Maryland, where she was beloved by her co-workers and members of our community. Sylvia is survived by her parents, James and Eloise, and 6 brothers and sisters. Frank Kohler. Frank was a defense contractor at the Navy Yard. He and his wife, Michelle, who works at Pax River Naval Air Station, also in my district, lived in Tall Timbers, Maryland, and loved to go boating and fishing on the Chesapeake and in Florida. He was a past president of the Lexington Park Rotary Club and served as King Oyster at the St. Mary's County Oyster Festival, welcoming visitors to the annual celebration. I live in that county. It's a wonderful celebration. Frank will be missed. Frank also leaves behind 2 college-aged daughters, Alex and Megan. Kenneth Proctor worked as a civilian utilities foreman at the Navy Yard and was in Building 197 on Monday morning to get breakfast on his way to work. He had been a federal employee for 22 years, and his eldest son, Kenneth Jr., just recently enlisted in the United States Army. He is also survived by his former wife, Evelyn, with whom he was still very close, and their younger son, Kendall, who is in high school. I want to thank the first responders. I want to thank them for quickly and courageously answering the call on Monday morning and put their own lives on the line to stop the shooter and prevent further loss of life. They demonstrate the best of America, along with all the dedicated men and women who serve in the Navy Yard, in the Navy, in uniform and civilian. They continue to enrich our nation through their outstanding service. Mr. Speaker, particularly poignant for me because my father-in-law and my mother both worked at the Navy Yard during the course of some of their careers. I've been on the Navy Yard numerous times. It should be, and we thought was, well protected. 12 people found that it was not protected enough. My thoughts and prayers are with the family of those who lost their lives and with all who are recovering from their injuries. And I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Thompson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the importance of manufacturing to our nation cannot be overstated. Creating products domestically supports local economies and creates family-sustaining jobs. But so many domestic companies also serve as a source of pride for towns, cities, and regions of the country. The Zippo Manufacturing Company and their iconic lighter are headquartered and manufactured in the Pennsylvania's 5th Congressional District, which I have the honor of representing. It is McKean County's largest employer with 900 hardworking men and women in a city of 8,000. Zippo has been making lighters since 1895, and today 160 countries around the world buy Zippo products. Zippo is a part of Bradford's community identity. Part of this identity comes from the fact that American companies were once renowned for building things to last. Zippo backs its lighters with a forever guarantee. The Parade magazine, a national publication, made note of this fact in a recent article titled, "Putting America Back to Work, 5 Ways Made in the USA is Staging a Comeback." It's companies like Zippo that gives American-made a great name. That keeps the world buying U.S.-made products and ultimately keeps jobs in America and expands the American workforce. The key to our economic recovery is tapping into these gems, utilizing domestic energy, technology and innovation, as well as a homegrown workforce to revitalize American manufacturing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back his time. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Connecticut, Ms. DeLauro, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, later today this body will vote on the House Majority Leadership Plan to cut $40 billion from food stamps and forcing over 4 million low-income Americans, citizens, veterans, seniors, and children to go hungry. This bill is immoral. It is wrong to take food from the mouths of hungry people. It is especially cruel when at the same time the House majority continues to support crop insurance subsidies to wealthy farmers and agribusinesses. Let us be clear about this so-called nutrition bill we are voting on today. The majority's leadership is making an explicit choice. They want us to force the poorest families in America to go hungry at a time of great need, while continuing to support and even expand giant government subsidies to the wealthy. This is reverse Robin Hood. This makes no economic sense. Even as it left anti-hunger programs in limbo, the Farm Bill passed in July by the majority expanded crop insurance subsidies. According to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, these crop insurance subsidies will cost taxpayers $90 billion over the next decade. USDA, United States Department of Agriculture, reports it spent $14 billion on crop insurance last year alone. Keep in mind, that means we will spend over twice as much on these subsidies than this proposed cut to food stamps will save us. Some members of the majority like to argue that these deep cuts to food stamps are necessary and that we, the richest nation on earth, cannot afford to help feed the most vulnerable members of our society. This is untrue. A decision is being made to cut $40 billion in food aid to the poor while giving $90 billion in subsidies to the wealthy. That is not right. So who exactly are receiving these subsidies? That is a good question. Right now, U.S. taxpayers pay, on average, almost 2/3 of crop insurance premiums for high-income farmers. 62% we pay for these crop insurance premiums. And according to the Congressional Budget Office, the federal government paid $1.4 billion in crop insurance administrative costs to financial and insurance companies, including a bank in Switzerland. Last year, over 10,000 farmers each received over $100,000 in crop insurance subsidies. And because the program is not means-tested or capped, 26 farmers made over $1 million from the federal government. 26 wealthy farm owners who we are prevented from identifying. And they could even be members of Congress. We can't get their names. They are statutorily protected. And as I stand here, we are going to fight every day to get the names of these 26 individuals. Meanwhile, the bill that we considered today would deny SNAP benefits to jobless adults without children whose incomes average only about 1/5 of the poverty line. And that, my friends, is $2,500 a year. Let's say no to them for food on their tables. We also know that crop insurance subsidies have a higher error rate, meaning more waste, fraud, and abuse than the food stamp program, one of the most efficient programs the federal government undertakes. And sadly, we know that there are members of the majority arguing strenuously for these deep cuts to food aid, who at the same time are pocketing millions themselves in crop insurance subsidies. They should be ashamed. Families on food stamps are struggling. We hear about seniors who have to choose between buying food or medicine, veterans trying to get back on their feet after serving their country, students in a classroom who can't even concentrate when others are eating because they're actually going hungry. These are the Americans this bill would see grow hungry, even as we subsidize handouts to wealthy farmers. This is immoral. If this is not wrong, nothing is wrong. But even if that doesn't sway you, consider the math. This bill would cut $40 billion from food aid, while the majority in this body voted to keep $90 billion in crop insurance subsidies. It would deny over 4 million low-income individuals a chance to eat, even as we are giving 26 faceless individuals $1 million each. I cannot support a bill that hurts millions of low-income citizens, children, seniors, veterans, as the majority continues to subsidize wealthy agribusiness. Historically, addressing hunger in America has been a bipartisan effort. Democrats and Republicans who have come together to say we have a serious problem of hunger in America. Let's work to eradicate. That was McGovern and Dole, Javits, Kennedy, and so many others. I urge my colleagues in both parties to vote this heartless bill down, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. The chair recognizes a gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Rothfuss, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When President Obama sold his health care law to the American people, he made many promises. He promised, he guaranteed, that if you like your doctor or your health care plan, you could keep it. He promised that his law would not raise your health insurance costs. My constituents will tell you that the health care law has broken these promises, that these guarantees are no good. Nearly every day I hear from folks, moms and dads, teachers, bus drivers, small business owners, health care providers, who are being hurt by the health care law. A woman I met recently who had just started a new job, making $8.50 an hour, learned that her hours would be cut from 35 to 29. If you do the math, that's about $50 a week, $200 a month, $2,500 a year. That may not sound like a lot of money to the elites here in Washington, D.C., but for a working person in western Pennsylvania, that can make a big difference with gas, groceries, or helping to pay the rent. A chemistry teacher recently called my office in Beaver County to share her story about the health care law hurting her coworkers. The special needs teacher's aides in her school recently had their hours cut from 37.5 hours to 28. That's a loss of $180 per paycheck. Many of these aides depend on this job to provide health insurance for their families. Thanks to the health care law, these teachers' aides and their families will lose their health care coverage. A mom from the North Hills of Pittsburgh recently got in touch with me to tell about the impact of the health care law on her family's small business. Kathy and her husband recently learned that their health care plan will be discontinued December 31st. Kathy told me that since Obamacare was voted into law, we have watched our deductible soar, our premiums soar, and our blood pressure soar. Enough already. Kathy's sentiment is shared by many of the western Pennsylvanians who called the office and who I've talked to at small business and constituent gatherings around the district. In the real world, when you buy a product that comes with a guarantee, if the guarantee is not met, you get your money back and you look for a new product. With only 13 days until the law begins to take full effect, more and more flaws are increasingly evident, and the President continues to delay arbitrarily major provisions of his health care law. We need to delay and dismantle the entire law so that a process of bipartisan health care reform can finally begin. It's time for a new beginning. It's time for a government that looks to the American people and our doctors and health care providers as not as subjects to be managed, but as partners who can help solve problems. It's time for a new beginning that brings Republicans and Democrats in support of bipartisan solutions together. As President Kennedy once said, let us not seek the Republican answer, let us not seek the Democratic answer, but the right answer. I thank the Speaker and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. McNerney, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor the millions of Mexican guest workers who came to the United States under the Becerra Program from 1942 to 1964. The Becerra Program is being highlighted by the Smithsonian exhibit, Bittersweet Harvest, and is being shown throughout the country. At a time when our nation was at war and laborers were scarce, President Franklin Roosevelt and Mexican President Manuel Camacho created a guest worker program known as the Becerra Program. In September of 1942, the first Becerros under this agreement arrived in Stockton, California, the heart of my district. These individuals embodied the American dream by searching for a better life for themselves and their families and worked hard to make it come true. The Smithsonian exhibit uses personal stories from the Becerros to highlight their experiences in this program and what they endured while adjusting to a new life in the United States. The San Joaquin Valley remains home to a strong and vibrant Mexican population, and the region's heritage and history has been enriched due to its diversity. I ask my colleagues to join me in recognizing the contributions of the people who came to this country through the Becerra Program. And Mr. Speaker, I also wish to honor the life of an education pioneer in my district, Flora Arca Mata. Ms. Mata was the first Asian American, specifically the first Filipina teacher in the Stockton Unified School District, breaking barriers of stereotypes that Asian Americans faced immediately after World War II, thereby helping numerous minority teachers join the education field. Ms. Mata retired from teaching in 1978 and passed away last Wednesday at the age of 95. Ms. Mata was born in Honolulu and moved to Stockton in the 1920s. Her family settled in the Little Manila section of Stockton. She attended the University of California at Los Angeles, where she met and later married her husband, Vidal Mata. Upon graduating from UCLA, neither Flora nor Vidal could find teaching jobs, so they traveled to the Philippines to teach. Returning to Stockton in the aftermath of World War II, Ms. Mata responded to a Stockton Unified ad seeking substitute teachers. A year later, she was hired to teach kindergartners full-time in the South Stockton school area. A steadfast public servant, Ms. Mata remained involved in the education system until her 80s, working as a substitute teacher and volunteering in her granddaughter's kindergarten class. Ms. Mata's commitment to the success of our students is an inspiration for our entire community. I urge my colleagues to join me in recognizing the barriers Ms. Mata shattered and the road she paved for other individuals to enter the teaching profession. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Nevada, Mr. Horsford, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I come to the floor today opposed to the potential cuts to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, an important food program that lifts families, children, and seniors out of poverty and provides an important safety net for those in need. SNAP is our nation's most important anti-hunger program. It provides food assistance to approximately 46 million Americans, and it kept 4.7 million people out of poverty in 2011. including over 2 million children. This food program has cut the number of children living in extreme poverty in America in half. Now, earlier this year, my colleagues on the other side approved a farm bill but left the food for America's families behind. They passed special subsidies for Big Ag, but for the first time in decades, excluded funding for food assistance for America's families in need. And now, months after providing special subsidies for Big Ag, House Republicans are bringing forward a bill to cut food assistance by $40 billion. Apparently, the first attempt at $20 billion was not deep enough. So they pass a farm bill that provides corporate subsidies, but they leave food for America's families behind. In my district and in the state of Nevada, more than 71% of SNAP participants are families with children. Almost 26% of all SNAP participants are in families with elderly and disabled members. And nearly 42% of all SNAP families are in working families. So House Republicans support corporate welfare for Big Ag and big business, but cut food assistance for the elderly, for disabled, and yes, even our veterans. We should not be cutting the safety net for our most vulnerable while maintaining costly government subsidies for the well-off junk food, oil, and gas industries. SNAP benefits, Mr. Speaker, average less than $1.50 per person per meal. That amount is set to drop to about $1.40 this fall when the 2009 Recovery Act's temporary benefit boost ends. Now, the person who receives $1.50 per meal in Nevada is not the problem with the budget. The problem is corporate welfare and the special interest giveaways that litter our tax code. I recently held a telephone town hall the last time the Republicans tried to gut food assistance for America's families and my constituents. I heard from families who are doing everything they can to provide for their family. I heard from seniors who are doing their best to keep their heads above water, and moms who are doing their best to escape poverty. If we cut SNAP even further, we are cutting a lifeline for these families. Now, another important constituency that is affected by this cut is our veterans. Census data indicate that nationwide, approximately 900,000 veterans receive SNAP assistance each month. An estimated 170,000 of those 900,000 veterans could be affected by the House Republican proposal to cut $40 billion from SNAP. In my state, studies estimate that 72,184 veterans receive assistance from this important food assistance program. That means roughly 1 in 3 veterans in Nevada, 1 in 3 receive assistance from SNAP. Well, my question to the House Republicans is this how we repay our veterans? Is their sacrifice not enough? By trying to ram through $40 billion in cuts to programs that people rely on, and then when that doesn't work, doubling down and trying to make those cuts even worse? Military families are on a pace this year to redeem more than $100 million in food aid on military bases. And the House Republican reaction is to tell them that they need to live with less? I can't do that. I can't tell those families, sorry, but you've sacrificed enough. I urge my colleagues to do the responsible thing, do the right thing, avoid these draconian cuts to programs that combat hunger effectively. This isn't waste. This is a critical social safety net program that families and children and veterans rely on. I urge this body to oppose the House Republican plan.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, for 5 minutes.
Speaker, this morning I rise to call upon the consciousness and the conscience of not only America but my colleagues. I rise in the backdrop of a dreamer's speech, Dr. Martin Luther King, who spoke about the greatness of America. Dr. King had no quarrel with this nation. He loved its values. He found it a place of promise. And I imagine if he was alive today, he would have an answer to Mr. Putin. America is exceptional. The world looks to America. America has been the nation's breadbasket. It has served and fed the world. So, Mr. Speaker, the farmers I know want to feed the world. They relish by being called the farmers who are the breadbasket. They enjoy seeing their products arrive in places where people are hungry. In all the years that I've worked in the United States Congress, we found a way to work with our family farmers and feed our children. That's why I rise today in opposition to a devastating food fight. And America should take notice. All of the food banks all around the nation should be bombarding this House today. All of the faith leaders should be immediately rising up and dialing in, for this is a devastating food fight. $411 million in reduction in my state alone, impacting 3,997,000 if this bill of $4 billion in cuts goes forward today in food stamps or the Supplemental Nutrition Program. 46.2 million people are living in poverty in America. 9.5 million of them are families. 16.1 million children under the age of 18 are living in poverty. Is that the exceptional America? We know that we are better than that. 34% of children in Texas are in poverty. 50.1 million Americans lived in food insecurity, and 16 million children do not eat nutritiously. That is what will happen today in larger proportions. And so this is the message. Don't cut SNAP. Stop the GOP from cutting $40 billion, 3.4 billion meals, or 24 meals per month per family. That's our message. How can we stand here, a country of dreamers and those who believe in acting? For Dr. King dreamed, but he was focused on action. He believed in helping the poor. He believed in jobs. And we come here today to stand on this floor with a straight face and engage in a battle of a food fight. I think it is atrocious and it needs to stop. Where is the goodness that gives Americans all opportunities to rise? I heard a member on the floor discuss Affordable Care Act. Well, get the facts. Right now, as we speak, the Affordable Care Act is providing premiums under $100 for those individuals that need to be insured, cutting poverty. That's why we need all of these factors, not cuts in SNAP, not the elimination of the Affordable Care Act in a continuing resolution that is not going to go anywhere. All of these pound on people who are in need. And I'm asking for relief. I'm asking for the promised land, the very promised land that Dr. King also spoke of, the exceptionalism that is America. When we send young soldiers in foreign lands, they are exceptional. But yet some of their families who are paid soldiers are now on food stamps. Is that what America's about, cutting the food stamps of active duty soldiers? We have to do better than that. And so our message is going to be a strong one. We're against it. And we're against all the pounding down on those who are trying to climb the ladder of success. We want to end sequester that is going to cut 67.8 million teachers out of the primary and secondary schools. It is time now to say no, don't cut SNAP, no to the CR, no to sequester, and yes to America, yes to the promised land, yes to the dream, yes to implementing what is right, yes to allowing us to climb the ladder of success. That's the opportunity for Americans. Yes to jobs. yes to education. I believe that if we do not do that, Mr. Speaker, the ancestors and early founding fathers, and even though we had our ups and downs, the visionaries, Mr. Speaker, are going to ask us why. God bless America, an exceptional nation with a big heart. Vote no today. That's what America wants, something for all of us. I yield back.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Farr, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Here we go again. Last week, we averted an attack on the country of Syria. This week, we again attacked the country of the United States of America. We attack the working poor. What is it about the this GOP-led institution? They can find nothing wrong with Wall Street criminals who have driven the American families into ruin. You can't find one bill on this floor to attack those who were wiped out by the recession, but we can spend several days attacking the victims of the recession. I'm talking about people who need food stamps, SNAP program. It's a debit card. They need help to buy food, and we help them. Our farmers help them by growing the food. Our grocery stores help them by selling the food. Our charity organizations help them when they fall through the cracks. And guess what? The helpers get paid. That's the money that supports the food stamps. Those are jobs. But that's about to go away. It's about to hurt those who need the help. The bill on the floor today is H.R. 3102. It's the Republican Take Away Nutrition Reform and Take Away Work Opportunity Act. Now, I added the takeaways because that's what it does. Sensible people ought to vote no on this bill. Oh, you'll hear that there are a lot of cheats out there. But guess what? The program has enforcement officers. They're in place. And when cheats are caught, they are fined or they go to jail. In contrast to the misguided Wall Street investors and the banking foreclosure mess, where no one seems to get caught or go to jail. But we here in Congress can pass a bad bill that takes food away from working mothers. You know, who are these people on food stamps? Who receives this aid? You know them. You know their parents. You know their sisters, their brothers. There's moms and dads, and you've heard by previous speakers, they're veterans, and they're people on active duty and service. There are people in need of extra money to buy food. Yesterday I met one of those persons here in the United States Capitol. She's a working mom. She dropped out of high school at the age of 16, but eventually got a GED degree. She was urged with her GED degree, now that she had a baby, that she needed to go on, but she didn't have a job. She needed help, and she got it through food stamps. She could care for her baby, and she decided now that she could care for her baby, she could go to community college to further her skill development, and later on to a California college. She's 21 years old. She's a senior in college this year, and that she's a mother of a 5-year-old son. I met her here in the United States Capitol because she works here. Her name is Lisa Russell. She won a Leon Panetta Hill internship and is one of our best and brightest and needs food stamps to make it work. I met her because she thanked me for opposing this bill. As she told me, there are 1 million leases out there, millions of people who need assistance. Don't deny them a chance to get out of poverty, to have help when they need it. AB 302 is a dream killer. It's un-American. Just a few minutes ago, we pledged to this flag behind me. Now it's time to live up to the responsibilities in that pledge. Justice for all, not just for a few. It's a bad bill and needs defeating. Thank you.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, I rise to talk about this heartless and mean-spirited attempt and the intent of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle here to cut $40 billion from the SNAP program, the food stamp program, that ensures that children, seniors, and poor Americans can put food on the table. Earlier this year, I participated in a food stamp challenge where we agreed to, for a period of 1 week, to limit our expenditure for food to $4.50 a day. That's about the average amount that a food stamp recipient receives for food. And so trying to eat on $4.50 a day was a mind expander and an eye-opener for me, because it helped me to see exactly how fortunate I was to not be one of the many millions of people who rely on food stamps for their nutrition. And during that week that I was on that food stamp challenge, I went around to a number of not homeless shelters, but bread lines, basically. I mean, where people were lined up, white and black, Hispanic and Asian, lined up, awaiting the food truck or the semi-tractor trailer to get there loaded with food so that they could get some of the free food. So some of these food pantries is what I'm talking about. And, you know, people lined up several hours before the pantry actually opened just to get some food. And so I can assure you that there are many people out there, and I spoke with many of them. Some of them, I spoke with one woman who worked 3 jobs, 3 part-time jobs, cobbling part-time jobs that pay minimum wage together and trying to take care of a family off of that and still being eligible for food stamps and needing to have those food stamps. And so people have lost their jobs. People have been offered and have accepted new jobs after this economic meltdown caused by Wall Street. Lost jobs. They have accepted part-time jobs, cobbling a few part-time jobs together to try to make ends meet for the entire family, and they need those food stamps. But what my colleagues on the other side of the aisle plan on doing is cutting $40 billion per year, or for this next year, 2014. They want to cut $40 billion out of the budget. The budget is a statement of our values. If you can give farmers crop subsidies, $15, $20 billion per year, and then hide by congressional legislation, hide the identity of the recipients of those crop subsidy payments that you, the taxpayer, gives to the insurance companies on behalf of the farmers. And then what you do, you give the insurance companies, you offset their administrative and operating cost in operating that program. We pay them billions of dollars a year. And so as it ends up with over $100 billion in a 10-year period, crop insurance for people who don't need it. And we're going to cut food stamps today, $40 billion. That's not the values that America stands for. I thank you, and I'll be voting against that legislation.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair